what got you here might not get you there, and being, confident enough to reflect on your leadership, your traits, your style. That to me has been the sort of biggest, I think, shift in leadership.
Welcome to a brand new episode of Starts at the Top, our podcast about digital, leadership and change. I'm Zoe Amma.
And I'm Paul Thomas. On today's episode, we're sharing Zoe's conversation with Louise Lai, Chief Client and Transformation Officer at TPXimpact in their Digital Experience division. Lou talks about the path that she's taken from charity fundraising to agency side and back again, and what that has taught her about organisational transformation across different sectors. Lou also shared her thoughts on the changing role of leadership and how leaders need to invest time into developing new skills and new capabilities to see them through these challenging times, which is a nice segue into, have you made any New Year's resolutions, Zoe? Is there anything that you want to invest your time into this year?
Two things, Paul. Number one, I definitely want to try and rest more and get a bit more downtime. And second resolution, eat more cheese.
Stars, you mean to go on? Is that because you've got a fridge full of cheese to finish off?
Yes, we do have a lot of cheese left over from the Christmas period. And also I did eat a fair bit of cheese over the festive season and really enjoyed it.
Yeah, there was plenty of that, wasn't there? I think I completely agree with you. I'm not on the cheese front, but my New Year's resolution is to always eat more bread. So and make more bread, which I didn't do enough of last year. I think everyone else doing it in the pandemic put me off for a bit. So one thing I was interested in was an article by my friend Helen Deverell, who was talking about the difference between routine and structure. And I think I've realised that the routine part of work was probably killing me a little bit towards the end of last year. And actually what I need to put more effort into is structure and making sure that the structure is there for me to work within. And it's because we work across different clients at different times and there's competing demands on our time. But I think what I've tried to do even just this last week is say, no, this day or this half a day is compartmentalized for this client, for this piece of work, and it's really starting to help. The other thing that helps with structure is the kids going back to school, because that ethic of them leaving the house in the morning and going off and doing things and us not having to get lunch or do other things for them like we were doing through the pandemic and through the holidays is much more conducive to work. So I agree with you on that. The other thing I'd like to try and do, I think, is really think about how I can move to a 9-day fortnight. I think that would really, really help my mental health and well-being and enable me to put some extra time into the charity that I'm a trustee for example, a couple of times a month. So I think that's something that I'd really like to look into.
Nice. Well, they sound like some great resolutions there.
Yeah, and you also shared with me a story about all of these big tech giants suddenly offloading office space. Did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, so this is normally a quieter time of the year for tech news, but there are things going on. And two of the things on my radar are some of the tech giants who are selling their offices, downsizing their offices. So, for example, Google's parent Alphabet, Facebook parent Meta, Salesforce ditching offices in Europe as part of the cost cutting that we're all facing. And then meanwhile, Salesforce has announced over the last couple of days that they are actually going to be cutting 10% of their workforce after hiring too many people. And the situation these tech giants obviously now is that they've scaled very rapidly over the last couple of years, but are now in the situation that so many of us are in, of having to tighten their belts. So it's interesting to see this development and think about where they're going next, but also what it means for this wider world of the return to the office and the tension between working from home.
It's interesting. There was a post, something popped up on my phone the other day from the BBC saying that there's a big investment. I think it's another 10 to 15 high-rise buildings going into London in the next few years. And you kind of wonder why and for what purpose, if the tech giants and other organizations are moving away from office-based working, just, what are these buildings going to be for? And obviously Google have that massive investment of over, I think it's £1 billion into their building running alongside the King's Cross, all the way to Granary Square, which is a massive investment that they can't possibly walk away from. But yeah, you're right. It's all about cost savings. Incidentally, I did have a conversation over Christmas with my niece, who's just started an apprentice role in a technology-focused organisation, and she said the actual drive there for people in her position, so younger members of the team, is they're still doing some of the stuff that was sort of associated with startups and tech businesses. So they do encourage people to come in and have their breakfast in the office and mingle with each other and talk and share before work starts, and a real culture of going out and finishing off work in a bar or a restaurant or a cafe or something like that. So there's a real sort of juxtaposition, I guess, there between some of the stories on the ground of how office space is still used well for bringing people together in collaboration, particularly when you're at that early stage of your career. But for some of the rest of us, and certainly for some of the people that the clients I'm working with, it's still a real shift away from office-based working and office-based working when you can, but with a real sense of purpose. So yes, interesting to see how they're all starting to cut those costs and cut those corners.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, the thing that's affecting all of this at the moment is the train strikes, which sound like they could go on until May, and the impact that's going to have on this behaviour change around remote work, because it certainly seems to be a real disincentive to go into the office at the moment, with travel being in absolute chaos.
Yeah, ice and snow before Christmas and strikes as well. It sort of does mean that there's that constant challenge there, and the cost as well, because the cost isn't going down. It can be quite prohibitive, especially when people have got used to not having to pay those costs. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that pans out, and the strikes show no sign of slowing down. So yeah, let us know by get in touch through social media, or send us a message if you're noticing any major changes to the organisations that you work for around this time.
Yes, please do. We would love to hear from you about how your organisation is tackling that challenge.
So now for Zoe's conversation with Lou Lai. I wasn't able to make this conversation last year, so I found myself listening back and trying to join in intermittently through the conversation. I think there are some really interesting points made in this discussion about the changing nature of leadership throughout the pandemic, and maybe we'll ask a few brief questions at the end of the conversation. But before we get to that, Lou Lai.
We are very excited to welcome Louise Lai to the podcast today. She is Chief Client and Transformation Officer at TPXimpact in the Digital Experience Division. She leads the overall strategy and experience for their clients, ensuring they understand their business objectives and that they're aligning capabilities and work to ensure they're helping their clients achieve their impact and goals. It's all about helping transform organisations for Lou and her team, from their culture and organisational design to their technology and digital capabilities to drive sustainable change and impact, a theme which I'm sure we'll be talking about more today. Lou has worked in the not-for-profit sector for over a decade, cutting her teeth as a volunteer youth worker, which led her to join Bernardo's fundraising team. She has extensive experience working with a huge number of well-known not-for-profit brands within the UK and globally. She is a member of the Board of Trustees at Blood Cancer UK, joining them in January 2021 at the height of the pandemic. And she also runs a global mentoring network for women in and around the For Good space called Fem Mentored. Lou, welcome to Starts at the Top. I'm so happy to have you here.
Wow, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I feel very flattered and privileged to kind of, be on this platform with you. I've loved listening to some episodes. I even have post-it notes from some that I've listened to in the last few weeks. And there's a lot that resonates with me. And I hope that people find this conversation interesting. So I'm everything that you're talking about, the concept of the podcast, like is really interests me, and I hope that the more people share, the more people take out of what others are doing, and so forth.
Totally. That's what we're all about. And that's why we're so pleased that you're all here today. And I personally am so delighted to have you on, because you are someone who I find really inspiring and really interesting. Your journey as a leader, which we'll hear more about today. And I know I'm not the only one who thinks that. So looking forward to talking more about your story today. On that note, one of the things that came up when we were talking about your sort of journey so far is that path that you've taken from charity fundraising to going agency side. So I wondered whether you could tell us a bit about that, because you've got all this amazing experience under your belt.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, I guess if I start at the beginning, like quite a formative part of my career was working at Barnardo's, and that kind of like opened my eyes to, I think, more the not-for-profit sector as a whole, like the potential, what you could do, what it was to be part of something that had kind of impact and outcomes at the heart of everything that we were doing. So that passion for impact kind of really was cemented kind of in that space. And it was, being part of a large organization, learning fundraising. Like my background was marketing. It wasn't necessarily fundraising, but it was direct marketing. And as it transpired, there was so much transferable kind of skills and knowledge that you could take from kind of measuring door drops for a particular brand to measuring response rates for, a fundraising appeal. So, it was great to kind of have that opportunity to start my journey, and kind of I got a really lovely opportunity to work on an innovation project at Barnardo's. Two of the leaders kind of put me forward, who were really great champions and supported my development. And it was at that moment it sort of opened my eyes to a different way of approaching problems and working a bit more in the sort of strategic and idea space. So, and that kind of gave me a bit of a taste of, okay, so could I make the move from like sort of working in-house at a charity in the fundraising team to working agency side? And it kind of led me to moving to an agency that wasn't in the not-for-profit space, but it kind of it took enough of those learnings. It was still kind of that sort of marketing space where you were thinking about, what are we trying to achieve and how can we sort of transfer the learnings. But my sort of at the heart, I was like, I'm going to do this for a year, and then I'm coming back to the sector with all my knowledge. And year to the day, would you believe, Zoe, I did in this commercial agency. I was like, I've done a year. It's time to go, almost like go back home, because that was where my heart was. That was my passion, was around sort of impact and delivering change, and how do we make that impact change sustainable, so kind of, I made that move to agency side.
And it's really interesting hearing you talk there about how it is seen as making a bit of a leap, isn't it? Whether you're going from charity to agency side, or indeed to vice versa. Do you think there's still maybe a little bit of a them and us thing between charities and suppliers? Well, what's your take on that?
I mean, absolutely. I think it varies. I've definitely experienced both ends of the spectrum, where you very much are sort of supplier, and so the relationship feels a bit more transactional, and so you're sort of constantly just being judged, I think, on the immediate outputs. Which does work for some organizations, that is right for them. But I've definitely been more drawn and found much more reward from it being about a strategic partnership, because actually, if you let your partners into your organization and you're really open, you're honest, you're transparent, and that, as a partner, you have a really clear understanding of what it is they're trying to achieve and their ambition and, their challenges, not kind of sugarcoating anything, because, the more the more you can sort of, I guess, adapt, an approach or a thing that you might do. So I definitely, thankfully have spent more time, I think, in that sort of partnership space where it feels equal. It doesn't feel like you aren't as sort of respected with your voice. Like very much I've been invited in, and one of my favorite kind of references was working with one of my amazing clients at UNICEF UK, Louise many years ago, and she was like, right, we're bringing Lou in and she's going to be our critical friend. She knows our organization inside out, but she can give us some objectivity. She can really, you know, challenge us to think differently and bring other examples so that our outputs and our outcomes are more rounded. And so, you know, for me, that's the space I really enjoy being in, and I think, you know, you get more from your partners if it is that sort of much more open, shared, equal partnership, and you're invited in to feel like part of the team as opposed to sort of kept a little bit at arm's length.
I 100% agree, and I think that more organisations are working in that way now on both sides of the fence, which is vital, isn't it? Because of the scale of the challenges that are facing us all in the social sector.
Definitely. And also it's, you know, it's such an investment of time, you know, to sort of bring a partner in, to, you know, get them involved in your organization. And so, you know, if you're going to invest that time anyway, you know, why not make sure that you're investing in that relationship and that you are bringing them into your organization, because you're going to get way more kind of reward for that investment in terms of time and energy. You know, people feel that. And it's even, you know, gosh, many years ago, small things like meeting people who were delivering program work, being invited, you know, to kind of see the work firsthand, you know, getting those real kind of lived experiences through those partnerships. You know, you know, even if it's one person in the agency team or the, you know, the consultant partner, to for that person to take that energy and that experience back to the rest of the team and kind of help them see, you know, where you are as an organization, you know, that's really beneficial and value, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, totally agree with that. And when you got to being agency side, more established agency side, what was that experience like for you?
It's definitely, like I talk about, and it was on one of your other podcasts, like, well, it was more the struggle, but we call it like the juggle, like the the juggling you have to do in terms of like the pace, the context switching, just the volume of like maybe projects or clients that you're involved in. Like it's just on such a bigger scale. So that like sort of shift for me was, you know, a really sort of big, I guess, as we mentioned before, like that leap. But being able to learn skills to manage that, and kind of like I talk about like my toolbox, you know, like, and that gets filled with the skills and ideas based on the challenges you sort of overcome along the way, but also the people you meet on your journey. And so for me, kind of being able to work with lots of different organizations, lots of different types of stakeholders, you know, means I feel like I'm much more able to navigate different types of challenges, you know, different constraints, or, you know, as you know, we've both spoken about before, you know, the last couple of years, you know, helping businesses and organizations adapt when the environment is just completely not as planned. You know, for me, that like that shift and kind of sort of working agency side is really sort of given me, I think, the tools to be able to do that effectively.
Yeah, definitely. It's a real kind of varied skill set, isn't it? And obviously, you know, the amazing skills that you developed in-house at a charity will have stood you in really good stead for building on those strengths further. And that really takes me to the next thing I know we were going to talk about around leadership and how that's evolved in the not-for-profit sector. And I wondered what trends you'd noticed about that over the last couple of years.
Yeah, definitely. And for me, leadership is such an interesting concept because it has evolved so much. And I remember when I first sort of joined the sector, and I thought, okay, the obvious pathway for me, I need to just find my way to maybe being a director of fundraising, because that's the only sort of leadership pathway. But, you know, thankfully the sector has matured, it's much more diverse now. And I think the sort of the last couple of years have really I guess opened up a new concept of what a leader could be within organizations. You know, we do, you know, I'm lucky enough in the day-to-day to do a lot of work with organizations where we talk about kind of being a responsive sort of modern organization. In order to do that, it means leading in a slightly different way, and how kind of up for our leaders able to sort of make those switches from quite traditional hierarchical positional kind of leadership and power to something that's much more shared, that we're empowering our teams, that we're giving them autonomy with boundaries or guardrails that's needed. And so for me, that's been the biggest thing I've sort of trend wise that I've seen, is sort of that mindset shift that people have really had to take in terms of what does navigating and leading an organization through uncertainty really mean. And it means being really clear, that clarity of direction. You can't always be certain with stuff. And I think actually how refreshing as a leader to not feel this pressure to constantly sort of know everything and be certain about everything. Actually what the world is saying to us, this world isn't certain, this market, this economic environment isn't certain. So you've got to gear yourself up to leading in a slightly different way. And I know we mentioned this before, like one of the quotes that one of my colleagues, Joe Rafe, our COO, always talks about is what got you here might not get you there. And being confident enough to reflect on your leadership, your traits, your style, how is that evolving every time you set a new organizational strategy or a vision. Like that to me has been the sort of biggest, I think, shift in leadership and a potential trend and behaviour that we're seeing in the sector.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely bang on, and that's certainly something I've seen as well. And are there any challenges you think that with going on that kind of learning curve? Because thinking about some of the leaders that we were working with over the last couple of years, some of them adapted really quickly to that newer mode of leadership, and then for others it took a bit longer. Do you have any advice for leaders who need to really nurture those skills?
Yeah, it's interesting, and I've definitely seen that in a number of different places. A lot of leadership also is attached to culture and values. You cannot kind of change a leadership kind of approach without understanding how your values are baked in at the heart of everything, and how culturally you're creating a safe space, that it's inclusive, that we're allowing people to sort of try out a different approach to leadership. I guess capacity has been something we've noticed as a big challenge for organizations. So I guess having a really open and honest conversation around, if we want to invest time and resources into like evolving our leadership or our governance structure, how are we going to make the headspace and protect that to do that? Because it's not something you can do on top of the day-to-day running of an organization like a not-for-profit. So having really open conversations about capacity, having open conversations about, I sort of touched on it, governance, sort of doesn't sound that exciting. It's probably the biggest thing that we see that is a blocker for people kind of embracing maybe a slightly different way of leading or working within sort of maybe an executive team or whatnot. So we talk a lot about kind of thinking about your governance framework and how does your leadership and your executive and your board, the dynamics between that, I think, really affect kind of how empowered people feel, where decisions are being made, the forums that you have to really sort of empower your leaders to feel like they can maybe challenge, actually, just because we've always done it like this doesn't mean we could change it, feeling like they have that permission to do that. That's a very live conversation I had this morning with an organization around, what is the blocker here? And it very much it came out of those main things around capacity, governance and empowerment to really move forward.
And speaking of governance and driving change, you've done a project with UNICEF, haven't you, where you were getting them to look at how they could develop those things. Can you tell us all a bit more about it?
Yeah, definitely. And it's we were looking back at some of our old show and tells from last year. It's like, oh my gosh, it was almost a year since we wrapped our final show and tell. But yeah, working with UNICEF UK like last year was one of the most inspiring and rewarding kind of projects that I've been involved in with a not-for-profit organisation. you know, they were navigating a pandemic, a changing sort of kind of sector alongside everyone else. And the biggest driver for them was around their sort of SORP and contribution rate. Like, actually, we need to really streamline our costs so that we are delivering more impact. You know, more of our kind of income is going towards the program work. That is 100%. That was the driver, which, of course, as a not-for-profit organisation there for children and young people, that is what they should be doing. And so, yeah, we sort of tackled it from two angles. So one was kind of the macro kind of, as UNICEF UK, you know, what kind of organisation do you want to be? So this is where we were able to work with, at the time, it was an interim CEO and the executive and SLT around, like, here are some attributes of a modern organisation. You know, how ambitious do you want to be? Like, how much down this sort of spectrum would you like to be? And then, you know, as sort of objective partners, we had done some discovery, some insight, and we could say, okay, well, if you want to be here, you know, really simply, you know, if you want to be a 5 here, well, actually, at the moment, you're only a 2. So this is the gap you've got to close, you know. So we were able to, we call it like be the mirror. So we can reflect back to the organisation. Actually, that's amazing, but this is where you're at. And this is based on your all staff survey, the people that work day to day, you know, kind of really bringing to life the insights. You know, it was about the lived experiences of the staff that kind of make UNICEF UK what it was. So kind of working on that sort of attributes of an organisation, and then thinking about, okay, well, if that's where we want to be, what's the governance and leadership structure that we might need in place to kind of support that, which was all around empowering teams, decisions being made closest to where the subject matter expertise were, not endless forums and meetings and getting sign off, you know, really kind of working out in the open. Hence, I mentioned about show and tells. You know, we did 6 show and tells, and we were just saying, hey, this is what we've done. We've just met with the executive team. Oh, here's a couple of members of the exec team. They're going to tell you what we discuss in a workshop because we're working out in the open and these are our values. So we very much kind of came at it from an organizational kind of leadership perspective on one hand, and then on the other hand, we were sort of parallel running, co-designing a new way of working. So, like, actually the day-to-day, we've got less people because we've restructured so that we can, you know, manage our kind of ratios. How are we actually going to deliver this program with fewer people in a different way? So thinking about sort of agile marketing principles and, you know, coaching the team through that. So it was pretty intense time last year, I'm not going to lie, but it was incredibly rewarding. And, you know, we were able to benchmark, you know, survey people and like show back to the organization, you know, this is the change we've made.
And that's amazing, isn't it? Because having these kind of quite strategic changes, they inevitably get adopted and embedded much more effectively if you've thought about what they're going to look like on a practical day-to-day level, as much as the making of those decisions and developing the vision. So that's really exciting, isn't it? And do you think more charities are going to go down that kind of path?
Yeah, I think so. Like, talking to organizations, particularly those who are looking at their organizational strategy, like so many, you know, organizations, like, do you know what, we just kind of need to get through this pandemic. Like, how do we just, you know, shore ourselves up, protect what we need to protect, you know, not kind of reduce services if we don't need to. You know, there was very much a kind of, okay, we just need to survive. And I think, you know, what I hoped that would come out of it, and some of the stuff we were talking about probably closer towards sort of 2021, was kind of, okay, there's survival, but then how are you going to thrive? What are you taking from this that means you're going to change the way you think about stuff, what you might invest and prioritize in, you know, particularly when we think about sort of digital and technology infrastructure. You know, there was such a big swathe of movement that was needed to kind of shore up organizations to get through what they needed to get through in terms of literally day to day the team, but also delivering services that, you know, for some people were an absolute lifeline during that time. And so we're definitely seeing now a couple of organizations thinking about well, if we're about to sort of hit refresh on our organizational strategy, is this a really good opportunity to also think about, okay, our operating model, what's the kind of organization we want to be, and kind of like probably really answering that purpose question, like, why do we exist? Has that changed in the last couple of years? Has that need changed? Do we need to diversify what we're doing, or are we meeting the needs of the, you know, priority, maybe user groups or what have you that we've identified. And so we're definitely seeing a much more like resurgence of energy into being open to something like this.
Which is great, isn't it? And this is where we're going to see the unfurling impact of the pandemic for probably years to come, aren't we? Because suddenly moving from why not to why is really exciting, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. And like, I'm so passionate about the sector and kind of it being set up for success. So, as much as like UNICEF UK did not want to do it, I was like, you have to do a webinar, you have to tell us or other organizations, you're a large organization, it's complex, there are silos, there are the challenges that all other organizations have. And the more people that we can talk to about in the sector, maybe the more that you might inspire or help people to see the art of the possible, like you say, the sort of the hope and the energy and, the feedback from the people that we work with, like sort of co-design with the day-to-day team as well as the exec and leadership, is they learn working with a partner. We worked out in the open, we weren't polishing presentations right into the end and then share it. We were like, cool, here's the slide deck, it's open, this is roughly what we're going to do, we'll share work in progress, here's a mirror board, we're going to make this open. Like suddenly they felt like they could see what was possible by being supported on that journey as well. And so yeah, like it's such an exciting time for the sector. And I know there's lots of like not gloom, but there's like there's challenges on the horizon with economic downturn, cost of living crisis, but like fundamentally at the core of what this sector stands for, the people or services they provide, that is still there, that unites everyone. Sorry, I feel like I went on quite a bit of a soapbox of come on.
No, this is why you're here. Amazing. And on that note, I think very related to that, we talked about change, we talked about governance, we talked about how we need to keep evolving as a sector. And a big part of that is going to be about representation at leadership level, isn't it? So you and I think we've bonded over this issue quite a lot, haven't we, when we've talked about it and on other occasions. What's your view on where the sector's at with this stuff, Lou?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a journey, right? And I think, and I've seen a lot of change in my time, and I definitely for a while didn't feel like the sort of director route was something for me, because actually every meeting I was in, none of the directors looked like me, in terms of like ethnicity, background, gender, like that just wasn't, it didn't feel accessible to me. And so, I definitely feel like there's been some, movement in terms of like really understanding the diversity, but, like how equitable are our kind of routes to leadership within our sector in terms of like people from different backgrounds and making sure that representation is there. I definitely feel like we're much more open as a sector. And I use we, like the people that I engage with, the people that I spend time with, and it's not unlikely I'm kind of drawn towards like-minded individuals, so I'm also aware of that bias, but it does feel like we're making space and being more open to different voices, to kind of accessibility in terms of like platforms, and how people are able to kind of, I guess, feel safe to have conversations within the sector around what's possible, and kind of being able to, I think, feel confident that they could, they're just as worthy of applying for something as anyone else, and seeking promotions and leadership. And I think it's great. I still think there's a long way to go. I'm still, we're still not where we need to be in terms of representation across the sector. And I hope that the different bodies that exist within our sector continue to shine a spotlight on that, and have the difficult conversation. But we talk a lot about kind of inclusive leadership, and kind of it is, I guess, to what we were talking about earlier, it is a bit of a mindset shift. And I was really in Michael's podcast, he was talking about being truly user-centered, like the voices that come through, and like my experience of working with Blood Cancer UK on the board of trustees, first time trustee like member, didn't know what to expect. It's very, it's a health-based organization. They're very, do a huge amount in kind of like advocacy and research. So it definitely isn't my background, but my goodness, the diversity in voices that come through in terms of like the patient groups, backgrounds. It's not just about blood cancer research kind of supporting the majority. It's about knowing that health outcomes are so different depending on where you live in the country, your background, all of these things. They are the live conversations that this organization is having and what they're trying to tackle. So I definitely feel like there's bursts of real light and change coming through the sector.
Absolutely. Amen to that. And of course, there is still a long way to go on that journey, isn't there? As you said, what can people like us do who are obviously from different backgrounds, where we've got some privilege as well, and a platform that we can use to help people? What can people like you and I do to help bring more people from different backgrounds into leaders' roles?
Yeah, I think for me, it's around like your point around privilege. The privilege here is the platform and network. So every touch point that we have, it's about making sure that we're creating that safe space and that safe forum for these conversations to be surfaced. They're not easy conversations to navigate. And, we were talking about our sort of, like, depending on your heritage and your connection to that, how you feel like you fit in or you don't fit in. And I think it's kind of like helping people understand that your lived experiences mean that you might, think about something in this way or think about something in that way, and kind of like being, as open and as honest as we can. Like I'm for some reason, as a natural introvert, I've chosen a career where I have to speak to people all the time. So I do ask myself all the time why I've done that, but it's because I give a shit. Like I want to have the right conversation. I want to have the difficult conversation and make change happen. And so I think for us, Zoe, is continuing the conversation, challenging the narrative where we can, being open to also like feedback, right? Like, okay, is this like, how am I like presenting this? Is it being sort of received in the way that is helpful? Because we sort of might think that we're saying something in a particular way that makes it really clear, and maybe that's not, because we've got some biases that we're also holding. So being like really aware of those is super helpful.
It really is, isn't it? It's a process of constantly questioning ourselves and each other, and encouraging in particular leaders who aren't from those minority backgrounds, I think, to ask those quite hard questions of themselves.
Yeah, definitely. And we're particularly when in the sort of not-for-profit sector as well, you're also navigating funding, right? And where does that funding come from? Like, what are the values attributed to that? How controversial might that funding be? And we're having a very live conversation at the moment around kind of how do you navigate the complexities of kind of business and impact whilst maintaining your values, to make sure that you feel like you're making the right decision, that it's informed. But they're not easy conversations to navigate, and they're really quite complex. And so but creating the space, a safe space for those conversations to happen is absolutely, the basic thing that a leader, should be doing at the moment is, like, get educated, do the research, do the information, say when you don't know, you don't understand, that's fine, but make it known that this conversation is welcome and it's a safe space.
100%, absolutely. And it's about creating those safe spaces, isn't it? So there were a couple of more things I wanted to ask you. So on that point, actually, one thing that you and I have discussed is leaders as facilitators, where they're trying to establish those shared goals with their team, and they're very much got this role of bringing people together to make progress towards those goals and those outcomes. And I wondered if you could share a bit more about how you've seen organizations do that.
Yeah, I think so. We've been talking a lot about like how the role of leadership is changing. So kind of like, what are the values of leadership? So we talk about vulnerability. That is a mouthful. so being comfortable enough to sort of share yourself, kind of transparency, so working out in the open, kind of this is very much not about kind of positional hierarchy or access to information, kind of working out in the open and modeling the behaviors you want to see for the people in your organization. And this is very much kind of some of the kind of, I guess, frameworks we talk to organizations around, is like, how can we support you in what we would describe as like non-negotiables for leadership now, like this is like what the expectation is. And so supporting organizations through those values means that ultimately they are going to achieve their goals, they're going to deliver the impact, but they also are kind of making sure that there's responsible kind of leadership governance within those organizations, depending on what it is that they're trying to achieve.
Very much so. I think, again, it's that new playbook of leadership that you talked about earlier. And we have talked quite a lot, haven't we, about women in the workplace supporting each other. And you've obviously got this fantastic project, Fem Mentored, which we will link to in the show notes. And I had the absolute privilege of speaking at your festival a few weeks ago. Can you tell people a bit about Fem Mentored and a bit more about why it's needed?
Definitely. So yeah, we founded Fem Mentored in 2020. So we, co-founder Rebecca Elcombe, we basically saw a gap in the for good space for what we would describe as modern mentoring. I think our kind of experience of mentoring was very much like, oh, okay, well, you should be referred to someone who's more senior than you. They can teach you what you need to teach you, and then that's your pathway. And actually, we kind of felt like it didn't really meet the needs, particularly of women in the sector, because at that time there also wasn't that sort of representation at leadership for sort of women as well. So it wasn't like you could see this array of like female leaders, really doing lots of stuff. Actually, it felt a bit like, oh gosh, well that's not for me, because clearly we're not being represented. So we kind of saw a gap in that space. We thought about technology and digital at the heart of this, because again, traditional mentoring is about meeting face to face, kind of organizing these sessions, and it's very formal, and it's it feels quite to me like almost like quite archaic now when I think about the concept that was being presented as, well, this is the option that you have. And so really thinking about digital and technology, we had this idea, but we thought, why don't we just ask women? So we put a survey out on LinkedIn, and over 100 women kind of filled in the survey, like, absolutely, I see this gap as well. This is what I'd love to get out of it. And it was mainly around facilitating connections, like providing a network and having a safe space to talk about the real life challenges that women were facing in and around the for good space. So kind of that was the concept of it, so that was sort of in 2020. So kind of pre-pandemic, we'd already kind of planned for it to be completely kind of digital. Like that was going to be it would basically live on Twitter and LinkedIn and MailChimp. Yes, we're using MailChimp, and kind of snowballed from there. Really, that was kind of the beginning of it, and we've been running it ever since. We're kind of monthly kind of drop-ins, getting amazing speakers, all based on the theme. We had a backlog of themes that all the women told us were things that they were worried about in terms of like juggling, parenthood, returning to work, asking for a promotion, lack of confidence, meeting other people, all of the things that they told us. We just lined up speakers through our network. And I have to say, like, our network has been, the guiding light of making this possible, because everyone was like, yeah, I'll do it. I'm happy to give you half an hour of my time, because I get so much out of this. So kind of that was the concept of running those monthly events. And then we've done a couple of mentoring programs where we've actually matched women kind of from around the sector, but also kind of broader now. We've definitely sort of seen interest outside of the for good space, and we're kind of like, do you know what, the more women we reach, the better. And actually, there's a lot of women who apply from the not-for-profit sector who specifically say, and do you know what, it'd be great if I could be matched with someone outside of the sector so I could learn a bit more about, commercial or working in a consultant or an agency, so we're seeing that diversity of kind of skills and experience come through. And so, yeah, that's been, nearly 300 women we've matched, and we've got our current program live now. So we've got about 90 people signed up. So that's running until January. And then, yeah, we did Femme Festival, which, Zoe, you were amazing. And kind of, we were talking about kind of getting in your own way. What are the things that stop women feeling confident enough to progress? You know, we've all been there, and we all will continue to be there, but we can lift each other up and support each other on our journey. So, yeah, that was a very whistle-stop tour, but quite long on Femme Mentor.
Absolutely amazing, Lou. I mean, as someone who's had the joy of speaking on your events, I think it's such a brilliant initiative, and congratulations on helping 300 plus women. I mean, that is phenomenal, especially during such a time of change. For anyone who wants to find out more about it, we will put the link in the show notes, but what should they do? Is there a website they should go to, or should they contact you? What would you like them to do?
Yeah, so definitely contact me on LinkedIn. We have our Twitter account, Femme Mentored, as well as Instagram, Femme Mentored. Just search that. And then if you search Femme Mentored on the internet, it will redirect you to a MailChimp kind of site we're working on, kind of like having a grown-up website. But for now, MVP, it does the job.
That's enough, right? That's
Yeah.
enough. Having a MailChimp like that is enough, isn't it? That's brilliant. Brilliant, lovely. Well, we will make sure that we share that with everyone in the notes, because it's such a brilliant initiative, and also really important for men in the workplace to know about this as well, so they can signpost their colleagues to it.
Definitely. We've had so much support from men in the sector who've like connected us with other women, have suggested it to their teams, have promoted all of our content. You know, that is, you know, I will say we've definitely had some amazing kind of support from men within the sector, which has been amazing. And they, you know, they are 100% the people who are supporting, championing their teams, and, you know, they want to make sure that, you know, women get, you know, the opportunities that they've had as well.
Exactly. That's brilliant. And Lou, just before you go, a slightly left field question, but with all these amazing things that you've done and all these fantastic ways in which you've helped charities and things you've set up like Femme Mentored, is there any advice that you would give to your younger self?
Gosh, I would say to myself, you can do this, and you matter. Like, when you, depending on your background and how you sort of come up to where you need to get to, you know, not having access to kind of role models or mentors or coaches, like, that was just, I just assumed you just kind of got to work a million hours a week and that, you know, you might get through somehow. But actually, for me, it's the staying confident, knowing that you can do it, and stay true to your values, because that's what will get you where you want to be. Because that is it. Like, I know in my heart I'm where I'm supposed to be, and I'm doing the things I'm supposed to do, because that's what drives me. I wouldn't do all of this if I didn't care. Like, I'm so happy to be in the sector and working with loads of, like, honestly, the best women leaders I've ever worked with in my career. Like, I feel so privileged. And so, yeah, I guess my final note to myself will be, it will all work itself out. Don't worry too much, because I'm a massive worrier.
That is great advice. Thank you so much, Lou. That was fantastic. Thank you for coming on the podcast today.
Brilliant. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much to Lou for joining me for that chat. I was so pleased we were able to get Lou on Start to the Top.
And as I mentioned, I wasn't able to join this one, and your conversation did make me think about some of the work I'm doing, particularly around a communications audit at the moment. Lou talked about how leaders need to invest time in their development so that they can better empower their teams in gaining the new skills they'll need in the future. And I wonder what this means for performance measurement and how we define success. People are doing their jobs differently, and we're looking at leaders to empower them to make decisions and drive their own success. Then what does it mean for some of the outdated ways, I think, that we measure success? And certainly in this comms audit, I'm seeing teams measured in old-fashioned ways, but KPIs, key performance indicators, seem to be quite old-fashioned in this day and age. So I just wonder, are you in your organisation starting to move away from some of those old ways of measurement, KPIs, towards OKRs, which Zoe and I discussed earlier this morning, but OKRs, objectives and key results, for example. Is there a shift? Is there a change? And how are you managing that change? We'd love to hear from you, or anything else that you heard in Lou's conversation with Zoe that struck a chord. In the meantime, you can find us on Twitter. We're at Starts at the Top 1, and you can also email us at startsattetop@gmail.com.
And if you listen to us on Apple Podcasts or anywhere else you get your podcasts, you can rate and review. Please do. It all helps with our visibility and reach. And we'll speak to you again in a couple of weeks.
Goodbye.
Bye.